Alien girl discovers the unexpected meaning of Fami. Zira had never seen Earth before, but her mission was clear: explore, observe, and understand. She was an alien from a distant planet called Scythria, where her people had achieved a level of intelligence and technological advancement that made them seem almost godlike to lesser civilizations. The Scythrians had long been focused on the pursuit of knowledge, always searching for new frontiers to expand their understanding of the universe. However, there was one thing that remained a mystery to them: the concept of Fami. It had appeared in ancient texts, in whispers of human history, and even in the most modern works of literature and communication. Fami was a word that humans seemed to hold in high regard, though it did not have a clear, universal definition. The problem with Fami was that it was far too broad, too complicated, and too intertwined with human emotions for the advanced AI systems on Zira's home planet to understand. Every time it was analyzed, the machines came back with a different interpretation. Some said it was about family, others said it was about connection, some even said it was something beyond words, a force that transcended time and space. This intrigued Zira more than anything else. For a species so advanced in the scientific world, she could not understand how something so fundamental could remain so unclear. Her mission, then, was personal. Zira had always been trained to value logic over emotion, individuality over connection. The Scythrians were a people who cherished knowledge above all else, often to the detriment of their social lives. They had long forgotten the human-like bonds that connected their ancestors. In fact, most of Zira's people had forgotten how to form close relationships entirely. They viewed such connections as distractions from their intellectual pursuits. But Zira wasn't like the others. Even as a child, she had often found herself wondering about the strange things she had read in human history. She had read of wars and peace treaties, of families torn apart and then brought together, of bonds stronger than anything her own people could comprehend. But it was this one word, Fami, that intrigued her most. She had to know what it meant. It seemed like an impossible puzzle, but Zira was determined to solve it. The journey to Earth took several months, and when Zira finally arrived, she found herself overwhelmed by the sheer variety of life. The planet was more complex than anything she had imagined. Earth's people were chaotic, passionate, and unpredictable. Unlike her people, who had evolved to be purely rational, humans seemed to live for moments, to connect with each other on a level that was both frustrating and beautiful to Zira. Zira's first days on Earth were spent observing. She had access to the most advanced translation technology the Scythrians had to offer, so language was no barrier. She learned quickly that Fami was not just one thing. The word was used in many different contexts, and it seemed to evolve depending on the situation. People used it to describe their families, of course, parents, children, siblings, all of them bound together by blood. But it didn't stop there. Fami was used in moments of love, when one person cared for another in a way that went beyond simple affection. It was used to describe friendships that lasted a lifetime, bonds that held communities together, and even the way strangers could connect over shared experiences. Zira quickly learned that there were many forms of Fami. Some were biological, like family ties, but others were emotional, spiritual, and even social. Fami was a word that encompassed love, loyalty, trust, sacrifice, and shared experience. She had thought it was just a word for family, but now she saw it as something much deeper. The more she observed, the more she realized that humans held Fami in an almost sacred regard. It was something that defined their very existence, but this was not enough for Zira. She needed to understand why humans valued Fami so much. She had to know what made it so powerful. To Zira, a being of logic, the idea of such an emotional bond seemed almost primitive. How could something as intangible as Fami carry so much weight? Why did humans form connections that seemed to defy all logical reasoning? Zira had to find out. Her first real interaction with humans came in a small village located in a remote area of the planet. She had been following a group of humans for several days, observing their interactions. They seemed to be close-knit, a tight community that worked together in harmony. They did not appear to have much in terms of wealth or technology, but they seemed rich in something else, something Zira couldn't quite put her finger on. It was only when a woman named Sarah invited Zira into her home that Zira began to understand. Sarah was a mother, a farmer, and a teacher in her village. Her home was modest but warm, filled with the sounds of children playing in the background. Zira had expected to feel out of place, but to her surprise, Sarah made her feel welcome. As Zira sat at the dinner table, she noticed how Sarah's family interacted with each other. The children argued and laughed, the parents exchanged knowing glances, and there was a sense of safety and belonging that Zira could not understand. It was unlike anything she had seen before, even in the most technologically advanced parts of her own world. After dinner, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Sarah spoke to Zira in a quiet, sincere voice. "You seem different from the others," she said. "Where are you from?" Zira hesitated. She had been trained not to reveal too much about herself or her mission, but there was something about Sarah that made Zira feel she could trust her. "I come from a faraway place," she said carefully. "I am here to learn about your world." Sarah smiled warmly. "And what have you learned so far?" Zira thought for a moment. "I've learned that humans are strange," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "You live with so much emotion, you form connections that I can't understand." "You call it family, but it's more than just family, isn't it?" Sarah's eyes softened and she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Family is everything. It's the bond between a mother and child. It's the love between partners. It's the way we help each other even when we don't have to. Family is what makes us human. It's what gives us strength." Zira sat in silence for a long time, reflecting on Sarah's words. She had expected something more complicated, more scientific. But instead, Sarah had described something so simple, so pure. Family was about love, about connection, about sharing one's life with others. It wasn't a concept that could be measured or quantified, it was felt. Zira realized then that she had been looking at it all wrong. Family wasn't just a word. It was a force, a living thing that pulsed through every person on Earth. And now she was beginning to feel it too. Zira spent the next few days in the village, watching Sarah's family, observing their interactions, and reflecting on what she had learned about family. It was strange, yet captivating. The more she observed, the more it seemed to her that family was the key to human strength. It was a bond between people, one that allowed them to face hardships together, to grow and learn, and to protect each other. But Zira couldn't quite wrap her mind around it. How could something as intangible as a feeling be so important? She had seen no physical evidence of it, no machines, no advanced technologies, no logic to explain it. But the people around her carried it with them, like an invisible thread tying them together. Zira was determined to understand it better. One afternoon, while walking through the village, Zira was approached by a young boy named Liam. He was about 10 years old, with messy hair and a curious expression. He had been watching Zira from a distance for a few days, but today he finally decided to speak to her. "Are you a visitor?" Liam asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Zira smiled. She had grown used to the human children's curiosity. "Yes, I am. I've come to learn about your world." Liam seemed intrigued. "Learn about what?" Zira paused for a moment, thinking. "About your family. I'm trying to understand it." Liam tilted his head, looking puzzled. "Family, you mean family?" Zira nodded. "Yes, but not just family. I think it's more than that." Liam thought for a moment, then smiled as if he had an idea. "You should come with me," he said. "I'll show you." Curious, Zira followed him. He led her to a small field just outside the village. There, a group of children were playing, laughing, and running around. Zira watched closely, observing their interactions. The children were playing a simple game, passing a ball back and forth, but there was something special about it. They didn't just play to win. They helped each other, cheered each other on, and took turns. There was no competition, no fighting. The game was all about having fun and being together. Liam grabbed the ball and ran towards Zira, holding it out to her. "You can play too," he said eagerly. Zira hesitated. She had never played such a simple game before. In her world, everyone was always too busy to have fun. They focused on knowledge, on learning, on progress. But this was different. This was about connection, about enjoying each other's company. She took the ball, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. The game was simple, but the more Zira played, the more she felt the bond between the children. It wasn't just the game that made them smile. It was the joy they shared, the laughter, and the way they looked out for each other. When one child stumbled, the others were quick to help them up. If someone missed the ball, they didn't get upset. They laughed and tried again. There was no judgment, no pressure, just acceptance. And Zira realized then that this was part of what family meant. It was not about being perfect. It was about being there for each other, no matter what. After the game ended, Liam led Zira back to the village, where they were greeted by Sarah and the others. Zira had learned something important that day. Fami wasn't just a word or a concept, it was a feeling and experience. It was something that could not be explained in logical terms. It was something that could only be understood by living it. That evening, as Zira sat by the fire with Sarah's family, she found herself deep in thought. She had been observing humans for days, trying to understand Fami. But it was only now that she began to realize that she couldn't understand it with her mind alone. She had to experience it with her heart. It wasn't enough to simply watch from the outside. To truly understand Fami, Zira needed to feel it for herself. The next morning, Zira decided to take a walk alone through the village. As she walked, she found herself deep in thought, reflecting on everything she had learned so far. She had come to Earth expecting to find answers, expecting to understand the mysteries of human culture with her advanced intellect. But what she found instead was something that transcended all logic. Fami was not a puzzle to be solved. It was a truth to be lived. Zira walked past the small homes of the villagers, each one unique, yet all connected by a sense of community. She saw people working together, helping each other with their daily tasks. She saw children playing, families eating together, and friends talking and laughing. There was a warmth in the air, a sense of belonging that Zira had never experienced before. She thought about her own people, the Scythians. They were so focused on knowledge and progress that they had forgotten the value of connection. They had built their society on logic, on reason, but in doing so, they had lost something important. Zira realized that while her people had achieved great things, they had also sacrificed something essential. They had forgotten how to truly connect with each other. Zira stopped by the edge of the village and gazed out at the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the fields. She felt a sudden rush of emotion, a feeling that was both unfamiliar and beautiful. It was as if the entire world was in harmony and she was a part of it. She had come to Earth seeking knowledge, but what she had found was something far more profound. Fami wasn't just a word, it was a way of life. It was the bond between people that made life meaningful. It was the love and loyalty that held families together, the trust and support that kept friendships strong. It was the feeling of belonging, of being part of something greater than oneself. As Zira stood there, watching the sun set over the village, she made a decision. She would not return to her people just yet. She needed to learn more about Fami. She needed to experience it for herself, to understand it on a deeper level. There was still much to learn, and she was ready to embrace it. Zira returned to the village that evening, her heart full of new understanding. She had spent so much time trying to figure out what Fami meant, but now she realized that the answer wasn't something she could find in books or machines. It was something that could only be understood by living it, by being a part of it. As she sat down with Sarah and the others, she felt a sense of peace. For the first time in her life, Zira felt like she belonged. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a part of something bigger, a part of Fami. The days passed slowly for Zira as she continued to live with Sarah's family. Each day, she learned something new about Fami. She observed the way the villagers worked together, the way they shared moments of joy and sorrow. There was always something to learn, something to feel, something to experience. It was as if Fami was woven into the very fabric of their lives, something that connected them all, even when they weren't aware of it. Zira spent more time with the children in the village, seeing firsthand how Fami was expressed in simple acts of kindness and cooperation. One afternoon, she sat with a group of young girls as they helped each other pick wildflowers. They chatted and laughed as they worked, never once complaining or fighting. They didn't care who was the best at picking the most flowers. They just enjoyed each other's company. To Zira, it seemed so simple, but it was something her people had long forgotten. The Scythians had always valued efficiency, productivity, and progress. But here, in this small human village, the value was in the relationships, in the moments of connection that made life meaningful. Zira's mind was full of questions, but now they weren't about the word itself. She no longer needed to define Fami. It was no longer just a puzzle to be solved. It was something she had to feel, something she had to experience fully. She could see it everywhere in the way people helped each other, in the way they smiled at one another, and even in the quiet moments when nothing was being said. It was there, in the shared silence, in the unspoken understanding. One evening after a long day of work, Zira sat outside with Sarah watching the sunset. The air was cool and the sky was painted with warm orange and purple hues. It was peaceful, and for the first time in her life, Zira felt truly at peace. The hum of the village was soft in the background, and she realized that this was what it meant to belong. She didn't have to be someone special or someone different to fit in here. She could just be herself, and that was enough. Sarah sat beside her, looking out at the horizon. "It's a beautiful evening," she said, her voice calm and content. Zira nodded, but she could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing against her. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said quietly, "about Fami." Sarah turned her head to look at Zira, her expression soft and kind. "What have you been thinking?" Zira hesitated. She had never been one to share her thoughts so openly, but something about Sarah made her feel like she could. "I've learned so much from your people, Sarah. More than I ever expected. I thought I was here to study, to learn about Earth, but what I've found is something different, something bigger. I'm not sure I fully understand it yet, but I feel it. It's in everything. The way you all care for each other, the way you help each other, the way you're always together, even when things are hard." Sarah smiled, a small but knowing smile. "It's all part of it, Zira. Fami isn't just about blood or family, it's about community, too. It's about being there for each other through everything. It's the bond that holds us together even when we don't have all the answers. It's what keeps us going." Zira looked at Sarah, feeling a sense of gratitude she couldn't quite explain. She had always been told that logic and reason were the answers to everything. But now, she realized that the answers she had been searching for weren't something that could be found in books or machines. They were found in people. They were found in the way people cared for each other, the way they gave their time, their energy, and their love to those around them. Fami wasn't just a word. It was a way of living, a way of being connected to something greater than oneself. The next day, Zira decided to take a different approach. She wanted to understand not just the villagers, but herself. She had spent so much time observing others, but now she realized that to fully understand Fami, she needed to open herself up. She needed to allow herself to feel what they felt, to connect with them on a deeper level. It wasn't enough to just watch. She had to participate. Zira began by helping the villagers with their daily tasks. She worked alongside them in the fields, helped carry water from the well, and even assisted with cooking meals. At first, she felt out of place. She had always been focused on logic and efficiency, but here, the work wasn't just about getting things done. It was about the shared experience, the way they came together as a community to support each other. Every act, no matter how small, was a part of Fami. Whether it was sharing a laugh while planting crops or offering a hand to help lift a heavy load, each moment was an expression of the bond they all shared. As the days passed, Zira began to feel a shift within herself. She had come to Earth as an observer, but now she was becoming a participant. She was no longer just an outsider watching from the sidelines. She was part of something bigger, something beautiful. Every time she helped someone, every time she shared a moment of joy or sorrow, she felt a connection. It wasn't just to the people around her, it was to Earth itself. She felt the pulse of life all around her, and for the first time, Zira felt truly alive. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Zira was sitting outside, watching the sun set once again. This time, she didn't feel alone. She felt at peace, surrounded by the people who had become her family. She thought about her home, her people, and how they had always valued knowledge above all else. But she now understood something her people had never realized, that the knowledge they sought was only part of the story. The rest was found in the connections they made, the relationships they built, and the way they cared for each other. That was the true strength of humanity. That was the power of Fami. Zira knew that she would never be the same again. She had come to Earth looking for answers, but what she had found was something far more important. She had found belonging. She had found connection. She had found the true meaning of Fami. And now she was ready to share it with her people. Zira's life in the village had changed completely. What had started as an observation mission had now become something much deeper, something more meaningful. She no longer felt like an outsider, watching humans live their lives from a distance. Now she was part of their world, their community. She worked with them, laughed with them, and shared in their joys and struggles. And as each day passed, she understood more and more about Fami and what it truly meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. But there was still so much Zira didn't understand. Even though she felt a deep connection with the villagers, something inside her told her there was more to Fami than she had experienced so far. She had seen the everyday acts of kindness, the shared moments of joy, and the deep bonds between families. But what about when things got difficult? What about the times when life wasn't easy? Could Fami still hold up in the face of hardship? Was it enough to keep people together when everything seemed to be falling apart? Zira found herself thinking about these questions more and more. She had seen the peaceful side of Fami, but what about its strength? Could it survive the challenges that life inevitably threw at people? One evening, as she sat by the fire with Sarah, Zira asked the question that had been bothering her for days. "Sarah," she began, her voice thoughtful, "I've seen so many beautiful things here. The way people help each other, the way they love each other. But what happens when things aren't so good? What happens when there's pain or loss or fear?" Sarah looked at her, her eyes soft but knowing. She had lived through her share of hardship. "That's when Fami becomes the most important," she said quietly. "When life is easy, it's easy to love, to connect. But when life is hard, that's when Fami is tested. That's when it's needed the most." Zira thought about this. She had never seen her people face hardship the way humans did. In her society, the Scythrians were almost perfect, advanced, logical, and efficient. They had solved most of their problems long ago, but here on Earth, the villagers faced struggles every day. They had to work hard to survive, to grow enough food, to keep their families safe. Life was far from easy, and yet they still found ways to come together to support one another. The next day, Zira saw just how strong the bond of Fami could be in the face of adversity. A storm had swept through the village, tearing down trees and damaging several homes. The villagers had already begun to repair the damage, working together as they always did, but the task was overwhelming. Everyone was exhausted and the air was thick with frustration. Zira joined them, eager to help, but she quickly saw how difficult the work was. The repairs were slow and tensions were rising. People were snapping at each other, arguing over who should do what. It was unlike anything Zira had seen before. The community that had always been so warm and peaceful now seemed tense, pulled apart by the weight of the storm's damage. Zira felt a sense of unease as she watched the villagers struggle. Was this the breaking point? Would Fami be enough to hold them together when things were hard? As the day wore on, Zira saw Sarah talking quietly to one of the villagers, an older man named Jonas. Jonas was the village's carpenter, and he had been working tirelessly to repair the damage. But he looked tired, worn down, and frustrated. Zira noticed Sarah place a hand on his shoulder, offering him words of comfort. She watched them for a while, wondering what they were saying. Finally, Jonas looked up at Sarah and gave her a small, tired smile. He nodded and went back to work, his shoulders a little less slumped. Zira didn't understand everything that had happened, but she could see the effect it had on Jonas. It wasn't about fixing the house. It was about the support, the kindness, the quiet moments of connection that kept them going. Zira realized that this was another side of Fami. It wasn't just about joy and peace. It was about support during hard times. It was about giving each other strength when there seemed to be none left. It was about standing together in the face of challenges and knowing that you weren't alone. Later that evening, as the villagers gathered in the common space to share a meal, Zira felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The day had been hard, but as she looked around the room, she saw something amazing. Despite the exhaustion, the frustration, and the damage caused by the storm, the villagers were still together. They were still sharing their food, telling stories, laughing at each other's jokes. They were still showing up for each other, still holding each other up, even when everything around them seemed to be falling apart. That was the true strength of Fami. It wasn't just about the happy moments, the easy moments. It was about what happened when things got tough. It was about the willingness to face challenges together, to support each other even when life seemed too difficult. Zira felt a deep sense of awe. She had learned so much already, but this was the moment when everything clicked. Fami was not just a word. It was a living force, one that bound people together in the best and worst of times. It was the heart of humanity, the reason why people kept going even when everything seemed impossible. As the meal ended and the villagers began to head to their homes, Zira stood up and quietly walked away. She needed time to process everything. She had come to Earth looking for answers, but what she had found was something far greater than she ever imagined. She had come to understand that Fami was more than a feeling. It was the very foundation of what it meant to be human. It was the force that bound people together, that gave them strength in times of trial, and that made life worth living. Zira sat on the edge of a hill, looking out at the village below. The sun had set, leaving the sky in shades of pink and gold. The village was quiet now, the only sounds the occasional murmur of voices and the soft rustling of the wind. Zira felt a peace she had never known before. She had always been alone, focused on logic and knowledge. But now she understood that true strength came from connection. It came from Fami. She didn't know what the future held or whether she would ever return to her people. But she knew one thing for certain. She had found something here that was worth holding on to. She had found Fami, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged. Zira had learned so much in the past few weeks, but now she found herself at a crossroads. Her mission to Earth had been clear at first, to understand the meaning of Fami. But the more she learned, the more complicated the question became. What she had discovered was not something that could be fully understood with logic or analysis. It was a feeling, a connection between people that could only be experienced. It was something beyond words, beyond even her understanding of the universe. Fami was not just a concept, it was a truth. Zira sat outside in the quiet evening looking at the village below. The sun had set, leaving behind a sky full of stars. The air was cool and the sounds of the night surrounded her. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the occasional voice of a child playing in the distance. It was peaceful here, and for the first time in her life, Zira felt truly at home. She had found something that her people had never known, the power of connection, of being part of something greater than herself. But now, she wasn't sure where to go from here. For so long, Zira had believed that knowledge was everything. She had come to Earth with a mind full of questions, eager to find answers, to uncover the mysteries of the human race. But now she understood that the answers she had been looking for were not in books or data. They were in people. They were in the way humans cared for each other, in the way they built relationships, in the way they formed bonds that lasted through both joy and pain. Zira had seen this every day since she arrived. She had watched the villagers as they worked together to rebuild their homes after the storm, seen the way they shared food, comforted each other, and supported one another through the toughest times. It wasn't just about survival. It was about living together, about facing challenges as a community. And Zira had seen the strength that came from that. But she also realized that there was something else she hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't just the villagers' ability to work together that was important. It was their willingness to accept one another, to love one another, no matter the differences. In the Scythian society, individuality was prized above all else. People were expected to be independent, to find their own path and to achieve success on their own. But here, Zira saw that it was the opposite. The villagers didn't just exist as individuals. They existed as a community, each person supporting the others, each person contributing to the whole. There was a deep sense of belonging, of shared purpose, that Zira had never experienced before. As the days went by, Zira began to realize that this was what she had been searching for all along. It wasn't just about finding the meaning of Fami. It was about finding her place in the world. She had spent so much of her life focused on knowledge, on logic, on understanding the universe from a purely intellectual point of view. But now, she saw that there was another side to life, one that couldn't be explained with facts and figures. It was the side that lived in the hearts of people, in the connections they made, in the way they loved and cared for one another. Zira had always believed that emotions were a weakness. She had been taught that they were irrational, that they got in the way of progress and achievement. But now, as she watched the villagers, she realized how wrong she had been. Their emotions didn't hold them back, they made them stronger. Their love for one another, their willingness to sacrifice for each other, was what allowed them to face the hardest challenges with courage and hope. And it was what allowed them to keep moving forward, even when life was difficult. Zira felt a sudden longing to be a part of that. She had always been alone, separated from others by her people's obsession with knowledge and logic. But here on Earth, she had found something that transcended all of that. She had found Fami, not just as a word, but as a force that brought people together, that made them stronger, that gave them purpose. And she wanted to be a part of that. As Zira sat on the hillside, she felt a presence beside her. It was Sarah, walking slowly toward her with a smile on her face. Zira had spent so much time with Sarah and her family, but it wasn't just her kindness that had drawn Zira in. It was Sarah's ability to live her life fully, to embrace both the joys and the hardships, to put her trust in the people around her. Zira had learned so much from her, and now she felt a deep connection to her. "Are you all right, Zira?" Sarah asked softly as she sat down beside her. Zira smiled, her heart full of emotion. "I'm more than all right," she said quietly. "I think I've finally found what I was looking for." Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" Zira looked out over the village, her mind filled with all the things she had learned. "I came to Earth to find out what Fami meant," she said slowly. "But I've learned that it's not something you can just define. It's something you have to feel. It's the love, the trust, the strength that people share with one another. It's what makes us human, and I've realized it's not just a concept, it's the foundation of everything." Sarah smiled, her eyes warm and understanding. "Yes, it is," she said. "Fami is what makes us who we are. It's what gives us the strength to keep going no matter what happens. It's what makes life worth living." Zira nodded, a deep sense of peace settling over her. She had come to Earth looking for answers, but what she had found was something far greater than she could have imagined. She had found a new way of understanding the world, a new way of connecting with others, and she had found a place where she truly belonged. The next day, as Zira prepared to leave the village, she stood at the edge of the hills, looking back at the people who had welcomed her into their lives. She knew it was time for her to return to her own people, but she would never forget the lessons she had learned on Earth. She had discovered the true meaning of Fami, not through logic or reason, but through love, connection, and shared experience. And she knew that no matter where she went, she would carry those lessons with her always. As she turned to walk away, she felt a sense of gratitude and fulfillment. She had come to Earth to understand something that had puzzled her for so long. But in the end, she had learned that sometimes the most important things in life couldn't be understood with the mind. They had to be felt with the heart. Zira walked down the path, feeling the weight of her journey settle in her chest. She wasn't just leaving Earth behind, she was carrying it with her. She was carrying Fami.